I like that quote from, most people don't know him anymore probably, but Peter Drucker. He was actually Austrian, but he was one of the main gurus in management. And he said, the purpose of a business is to create one customer. So that's the purpose of the business. I mean, one. That first one, right? Make that first dollar on the internet if you have an internet business. So he says, the purpose of a business is to create one customer. And he said, then marketing is not a cost. It's the only department that is not a cost department. Everything else is a cost because it's a cost, and it's any other department. But marketing is an investment, he said.
Step into the world of success with Your Brand Amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I am thrilled to have Josef Schinwald on the episode today for Your Brand Amplified. Josef, you and I, we were saying we have a lot of commonalities in the things that we're interested in, the approaches we take. You studied Eastern philosophy. My dad was a philosophy professor. That was like growing up in a house where the questions I would get were always about philosophy. And then you parlayed that into news, right? E-commerce, a number of other areas. And now you have guest experts on air. So thank you for being here. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, how you moved from one thing to the next.
Well, thank you, Annika, for having me on your fine world-class podcast. And I'm really already resonating with something which said that your father was a professor of philosophy. And well, how everything's interconnected, right? I mean, you can't be studying for too long spirituality, which I did when I was living in upstate New York. I studied 5 years for a master's degree, but then I was so broke. So fortunately, I had a political science bachelor, and there was a newspaper. They were looking for bureau managers, general managers in 16 countries in Latin America. So I got a job in Honduras, the 5th most dangerous country in the world at that time, 1995. And after 3 years, marketing was good. And so they promoted me to Buenos Aires, the headquarters, where I stayed 10 years. And that's how I did also. Well, I was with the newspaper, so media. I'm a seasoned media expert, but I was also invited to universities and to 50 television interviews that time because I was just continuing in my interest, following my passion with business. So I made another master's in international business then. And you know all this because you know business stuff. And it's like I studied the balanced scorecard and I taught it with profit patterns and profit models. So now I'm in the podcast world because a friend asked me to help him with this first. That was like 8 years ago. And I couldn't believe the misfunctionalities there. And so I said, there must be a better way. And when I helped him, I found out this is actually something I could do as a lifestyle business because I was already in early retirement, living on the beach, just like I'm now again back in Tamarindo, Costa Rica, where I stayed a very long time. But I came now from Mallorca just to visit. So that brought me to podcasting. And podcasting is fascinating for me because it's such a democracy, right? I mean, you had the media moguls and it was all controlled by them. And now you have democracy. I mean, only the best rise to the top, like your podcast, only the best. And it's not like, there are influencer podcasts, there are podcasts done by certain interest groups where you can never be invited because it's a competition for them. Let's say a podcast by a consulting company, that wouldn't be good for an outside consultant. And so, but ultimately, it's a fascinating, podcasting is fascinating because I see it as a marketing and sales channel. And I'm just waiting for more questions from you because otherwise I just keep on talking.
Oh, I love that you understand the world of media. You also understand how to work with people, how to take, the concepts in philosophy and have that emotional intelligence to put people in the right spots or guide them on their journeys in sales and marketing.
Yes, it's what I do. I have a very interesting methodology in my blueprint, or I would say that's what I do in my agency for premium buyers, for people who are really extraordinary. That's why I keep on doing it, because I just love to know them from Australia, from England, from America, usually in the business leadership, spirituality. But my shortcut, really, I can say it in 30 seconds. And you don't need an agency to do it yourself. So it's like very interesting stuff. And it makes perfect sense. So I look at my own positioning and that of my clients. I really work hard on this positioning on the email pitch template. And there, when I have that right, with the topic, with the bio, everything coherent, the real strawberry in front of the face of the host, then I look at other experts, like 30. I use LinkedIn, or I can even go just to ChatGPT. That's the easiest. I look for 30 similar experts, and I look on which podcast they have been on. And now it makes sense, because when I go to listen notes and in quotation marks put the first name of the expert, and I see it was on 20 great podcasts, and I could be, or my client could be on those podcasts because they have global rank 1%, 2%. They have good audience, but they're also really a good match because they're already similar experts, right? So that's how I do it, just a shortcut. And I get my clients really, and myself, I get really top-level podcasts. It's that simple.
Yeah. But you're helping people who don't have the time to look for those and might not know how to look for them. Because you can tell people, right? But if they don't have the time to actually execute, then it just goes nowhere.
Exactly. Annika, and that's my idea when I share everything. Because, when you're invited to a podcast interview, you want to have some curiosity. You want to have some stories. You want to be really relevant and interesting until podcast interview is over. So I just give everything away, because I know one thing. I know that either you don't have the time, and then you will use me. And say not use me, but you will contact me, maybe a discovery call, which is free, of course. Go to my website and a discovery call, or either you don't have the time or you have the time, you have all the time in the world, then you can also do it yourself first. I have an interesting client. His name is Matthew Pollard. He was on 90 podcasts himself. And he had, before he was 30, he built $5 million businesses. And he became such an expert in podcast guesting because he has made in interviews, and one particularly, a 7-figure revenue. He could trace it back to one podcast appearance. And he never talks about sales. He tells people not to buy from him. Not even his book. He says, go there, don't buy from me, go there. This is my free chapter. And he gives just resources. And at the end, he gets them in the funnel. And then there's such a nice guy. I want to buy from him, you see. It's paradoxical, right?
That was actually a perfect tee up for my next question, which was about the ecosystem of profitability. I think a lot of people start going on podcasts and they might not see the ROI of going on podcasts or hiring somebody because they don't know how to transition it to a call to action or to telling their story in a genuine, authentic way, not being too salesy, but also being able to sell.
Yes, Annika, you got me on a philosophical topic as well, because there are really 5 elements which mutually reinforce themselves. You could call it interdependent co-originating, those elements, because we always say this is the most important, but no, it's all how this is mutually working out. So let's say the elements of a good ROI, a return on investment. What is the investment? The investment is a few $1,000s for 10 podcasts, right? Or your time when you do it yourself. So how do you get 10x? Or more. But if you do, you can do it a long time, and you can do every year you could do 30 podcasts easily. And it's marketing and sales. Let's not confuse it just like with podcasting, with technology. That's just the technology. It's a beautiful one. So ultimately the elements of a real good podcast interview, where you can say this one leads to revenues, or this one leads to my profit models, because you have to think about what are your profit models, what is your profitability, your profit margin, and all this, right? Maybe you have several steps to the high-end retreat, which costs $10K per person, but it takes a long time until you get them. and you need a lot of followers first, right? So all of it, or you just want to sell books. Your book, you want to become a national bestseller. I have a story about it. I have a client. He's a national. He's a top-level bestseller on New York Times right now, Wall Street Journal with 3 books, all of them number 1, and also USA Today, Pfizer Rock, client of mine. But to go there to the 5 elements, 1, and make it now short, not to get distracted, it's how do you speak? Do you speak with your... You don't want to be salesy, very bad for podcast guesting, but you want to think about what you're selling. Because when you think about what you're selling, your topics will align with that. Because why people are selling from you? Because you're good at that. So now you talk about it, but don't sell. Just talk about those topics. They are related now to your sales and your marketing. Next thing is very important, as we already talked about, all this background stuff. Like your website is great, but you know what? You want to have actually a landing page. Something like maybe when you're a business consultant and you talk about how emotional intelligence is connected to spiritual intelligence, and have an assessment, and that people love that. They go there, and then you can send them a video response, and you have them completely in the funnel because you have all the email sequences. And ultimately, a few of those will buy. You don't sell anything on podcast. That's the most important thing. You sell everything afterwards in your ecosystem of profitability, which is your website backend. And next, how do you get them there to this landing page? You can also show there 3 buttons. One is the assessment, the other one is the discovery call or the strategy session, which is at no cost. And then don't say free because it's so overused already. And then the last thing could be a chapter of your book you wrote, right? So whatever you come up with, a lot of things, it can be just a list of 10 lists of mistakes you could make. And how I do this better, right? And things like this. But ultimately, it's important to have this. So when the host actually brings up your call to action, which is how can get people a hold of you. I mean, obviously, even me, I was so fascinated with this interview. My audience wants to know more about it. And then she will actually bring in the call to action, usually, with your website. And then maybe a / a very easy one. / to your website, / and some word, easy word to remember, because people will drive in the car when they listen to the podcast. They will remember this. And they come to this landing page where you offer these resources. But let's say you're talking about something very important and you want to control the interview a little bit and you get asked continuously questions which lead away from it. Then you can say, you know what, I would really like to stay with this topic, but these are 10 topics. We can't go into it like in detail. Not in this interview, but I would like to expand on the number 3 point if you agree with it. But I have a free resource, and that goes into the detail of these 10 points. And then you can make that up on the fly. You can say it now because the podcast host comes out later, like let's say in 2 months. So you can still make that page later. But it come up. Free resources is good. An element, again, of good podcast guesting, whole level podcast guesting. So we have this, basically the speaking itself, you have stories, particularly, like what's the story? You have a morale of the story. You have a story has actually a problem, solves a problem. So you know that is a story, it solves the problem. That was the implementation, that was the outcome, and that is the morale. And people relate with you on an emotional level and not anymore just on an intellectual level. And you got across a nice point. And then the curiosity hooks, like that is something where you say, in the next 10 minutes, if I'm allowed to, I would like to explain this. And you can do this without, let's say, an agency, a podcast agency. But you're learning how to get on high-end podcasts without needing a podcast agency. People get curious, what is he saying now, right? What is he going to say? And then ultimately, it has to be really a nice chat. I mean, I'm overdoing a little bit my answer now, so I should be keeping it water. But I could have up those 5 elements. Actually, if we give it numbers, the speaking itself, right, the public speaking, it takes overcoming the fear. You have to do it several times, then you feel very comfortable. Then you have to keep talking about the topics where you make money with, right? Then the landing page, which is basically a website, but a landing page where you offer free or at no cost resources. And all this leads into, actually, that is your responsibility as an expert, that you have an ecosystem of profitability. There are profit models out there, and they can reinforce themselves mutually. So you can't say, these are the elements, 4, I think, or 5. You can't say podcast guesting doesn't work. When I hear that, I say to myself, well, it doesn't work if we just talk. If you think it's just nice to talk, it might not work. And if you are on average podcast where it's a roll of dice where you don't know somebody to listen to it, then it might not work either. It does work. I have a lot of clients who give me that feedback, but I get sometimes emails from people who say it doesn't work, and then I meet them and I explain why it couldn't work. There is a better way to do it.
You are preaching to the choir here. The storytelling is so important. Understanding what your message is, doing it repeatedly so that you get used to speaking about your topics, right? Getting used to even public speaking. So a lot of times I'll advise people to start on smaller platforms, whether it's for a PR interview that is going to be, online, or whether it is for a podcast or some other form of video and audio, because you have to get comfortable. And so many people aren't. You and I are obviously very comfortable public speaking, but there's so many people who aren't. And the best interviews that I have, whether as a guest or as a host, are the ones where people are willing to share their stories. They're willing to go a little bit deeper. And sometimes that can be difficult, because I know there are some hosts who have a few questions that they're going to ask and they want to stick to the script. And even if you say something that should lead in a different direction, they're not willing to follow. And same thing for some guests, where I've had guests on who say, I have basically the same thing I speak about on every episode. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be a short episode then, because I want to get into the storytelling. I want to get into your why. How did you get here? What inspires you? What are you passionate about? What are some case studies, of examples you've seen where you've worked and really sparked the aha moment, or sparked being able to see your client have that success? And so I'm just really happy that you're here and reinforcing all the things that I try to tell people as well.
Yes, I'm really talking from my heart, because when you do this a while, then you see it's all so much lies up there also. I mean, millions of downloads and all this stuff, right? But yes, there are millions of downloads. If you have already 5 years of podcast and every episode has 5,000 views, you get millions. But many times it's just exaggerated by some people. And not only this, it's also like the podcast guests. Sometimes they just have their script. They don't know what they're doing. They're just selling there. And it's terrible for the host. It's terrible for the audience. And they don't have any idea what actual networking means, because this is the number one, the best ever networking you can do, going on podcast tours. Because I tell you a story now. There's one corporate storyteller. She's a corporate storyteller in California, and she does only high-tech companies. So she tells the stories of numbers. You have, when a startup in high technology has attracts investors, then mostly that's numbers, then she translates them to a story. It's incredible what she does. But she wrote a book, and she said to me, she got to know this guy, this podcast person, a really good one. I will be I'm invited by him now to talk, actually. Vince, I don't know the last name, sorry for that, but anyway, from Australia. And he helped her the launching of the book. He explained her a lot of experience, and he was a podcast host, and she was interviewed by him, and then they made this friendship, this lasting friendship. And then she asked me, and I introduced her to Faisal Haq. Faisal Haq, the guy who is like a Wall Street Journal #1 bestseller and all this, thought leader. And then they got together also. She got together with Faisal, and he explained her how that works with becoming a #1 bestseller. So it helped her message. She's now a #1 bestseller with her book. Amazing. So that's networking. Just one example. Every topic I talk about, I can bring in a little story. What is the moral of the story? The implementation is clear. You introduce automatically. People like to introduce, and then you meet. It's relevant. Josef introduced me to this person. You meet people you would not otherwise meet. And that is so spiritual also, because yes, we are on the internet, and it's a different world, because we can be connected with somebody from Australia, from England, from USA at one time, right? And then the morale is really appreciate whoever is talking with you, because when you later on, after the interview, you might launch a new book in a year or 2 years, and you have an email, and you have had an interview. You can actually ask again to get interviewed again, or you say, you know what, Annika Jackson, I know exactly where she should be on. I should ask her afterwards if she also likes podcast guesting, because I have to just make a few introductions. It takes me about 20 minutes, say introductions, and you will be on some fine world-class podcast as well, just to return the favor that you invited me. So this is networking.
Yeah.
You have to show a little bit that from your heart also, that you are willing to not just, you can't borrow somebody's audience, you can steal somebody's audience, right? So when I'm on one podcast and then another one, I leverage podcast audiences, but I borrow them. Can I not borrow them? Maybe I just say, wow, you're giving me this, can I return my favor, right? So the respect is very important. And, really always to talk like a human being, like if you would be meeting in a cafe shop, you don't want to just talk about yourself.
Yeah. I want to give an example. Right before we got on to this interview, I did an interview for my USC Annenberg podcast, which is Mediascape Insights from Digital Changemakers.
Okay.
The interview came out of being at Podcast Movement, where there was a product there, Zeotag. And I said, they talk about accessibility for video. And that is a topic that we teach in the digital media management program, master's program that I teach in, and understanding non-typical users, how to make your websites or apps or different things more accessible. So that I need to interview him for that podcast. We ended up speaking a little bit longer after the interview, and I'm making a lot of introductions for him. And now I'm going to be an advisor for his startup, like an official advisor. And while I love the visual of having two people in the same room doing an interview, and I know that there's the camaraderie, I also feel that this format expands my network much wider than that format would. I have the ability to put out more episodes. I have the ability to meet more people. I don't usually, I do still have some intro meetings here and there, but most of my networking is the people I meet on my podcast or when I'm a guest on their podcast.
That is wonderful, beautiful to hear. And that's a good morale of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to hear some of the other clients that have gone from not really understanding or the market advantage to being a podcast guest and working with someone like yourself to really draw their story out, have the right call to action, the right structure for their interviews. Maybe they were not sure, but they said, okay, I'll try this. And then they were astounded by the results. I know you gave one example already of somebody you were working with who got a 7-figure deal out of one interview.
Revenues.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yes, so the question is clear, right?
Yeah. But is there another person that you've worked with that maybe had more discomfort, at starting to get their story out, and then they had that moment when they realized, oh, this is really where it's at?
Yes, I have one lady, she has her 2 PhDs and very, very intellectual, and she does an incredible job with emotional intelligence and measurements like a corporation, the measurements, right? There are measurements in the customer view. Of course, financially, everyone knows that, but also in the internal processes, and then the human capital is all measurements. And she talks about the measurements, and she talks about the emotional intelligence. And she has these 2 PhDs, and she had no idea what her expertise was when she came to me. And then we did a few test runs. I always have something like a 3-interview experience package that everybody can do. I do the positioning, and I did that for her. And then I researched the first 15 podcasts, because you need about 15 podcasts really, because when they're good ones, I have only good ones. I don't do average.
Yeah.
So it takes about 15 to get 3, right? And she was never on a podcast. But when I sent those 15 out, I had like 12 responses. They wanted her on the podcast. So I said, this is incredible. I think your topic is so needed. We found a gold mine, And she was happy because she had no idea what is her expertise and what she should talk about. But then I said, when you look at the profitability of the coaching, like between spirituality coaching and business coaching is like 100 times more money because business leaders, they get the money from the budget. And so you should coach them, and you should position yourself as that. But we had to start from scratch with her. Even though she's incredible public speaker, but her website, we are right now implementing still the landing page, the profitability aspect, and particularly that one landing page where I look at like an assessment. To develop an assessment is not a difficult thing. You're working basically with 3 outcomes, and then you have a prolific person who is like ready for everything, and then the middle who needs a little bit more coaching, the third one who's still not ready yet, whatever. And then you have already the first interaction. So assessment, you can make it with Typeform, free tools, and with ChatGPT you get inspired. It's really not the big thing. And then we have the book. She launches it. It's coming out this month. So we are practicing this, not to sell the book, but to give them a free chapter. And then the last thing, of course, is the discovery call. But I think it's an extraordinary journey because through podcast guesting, if it's done right, you will fine-tune and sharpen your expertise because suddenly you're getting this feedback from very intelligent people who interview you. They ask you different poignant questions. You can listen to this yourself. It's not like going away afterwards. You have an interview. It's on YouTube. You can listen to it. You have several. You can actually put it in the AI software Opus, and then you create from one interview 20 clips, and you see what I'm talking about. I'm really good. I'm really talking well. I'm really an expert in this. And people are so interested in me. I mean, it's the feedback some people really need. And I think that's the morale that for me, public speaking, yes, you can talk about all the problems with public speaking. I'm so afraid of public speaking, and it's so difficult to overcome. And people have more fear of public speaking than of death itself. And I have lots of stories about public speaking. However, I want to let everybody know public speaking, you overcome it by doing it. Just do it. It's fun after a while. You will forget all these things, and that is the first step, actually. Then comes this fine-tuning of your expertise, and then you think about, how do I make money? So get started, because the feedback from action leads to a better business model of yourself. Unless you're already like, Mozart, Amadeus Mozart, the musician from Austria, Salzburg, where I was born, he already came up with the perfect music. He didn't have to correct any note, nothing. It was perfect. Not everybody's like this, I want
to ask a question about that, because I get asked to be on a lot of different kinds of podcasts. Some are more about being a mompreneur or a single mom. Some are about my expertise in podcasting or AI or digital media or public relations or branding. Sometimes it's nonprofit work because I've done a lot of that. And I like that because it's variety for me, but it's not honing in on any one message. So for those in the audience who are listening, and for myself, who have a few different, they have their hands in a few different honeypots, what would you recommend as the best strategy for them to really get results? Would it be to narrow down what they're going to talk about and only go on one certain kind of podcast? Or would it be is it okay to show different parts of themselves on these different types of podcasts?
Yes, but you have to, this is very advanced, For instance, I get these clients, and I have one where he's the growth guy. Forbes magazine called him the growth guy. And he's really good for small businesses, and he gets them immense growth with his strategies for introverts. And most of the CEOs are introverts. So many people are introverts who do this kind of lonely work like we do also. Not everybody's an extrovert, right? But he teaches only for introverts, and he's really the growth guy for small businesses. But I need to do everything. He tells me where he makes the most money. So he makes the most money with portfolio managers, like wealth portfolio managers, and with service businesses, like businesses who service other businesses. They have a special name. He wants me to, even for constructing businesses, constructions, and it could be like contract business. That's where he makes most money, he says, with those. But then associations and all this. So I have to really think, how do I reach them? So he has an approach, for instance, there are these two types of people, like when you are a portfolio manager, if you have a sales pitch, like an elevator sales pitch, people really turn away. Same thing like with insurance. He likes also to have insurance, those who are involved in insurance, selling insurance. Same thing, they pitch people, insurance salespeople, they turn away. I don't know why it is, but maybe bad karma from people before. So he teaches them networking. So now when I pitch him to a podcast of wealth managers, I have to be aware that if I pitch him the regular way, like I pitch him like a small business expert, consulting expert, they will say, not relevant. You know it. You're a top-level podcast host. If a pitch comes in and just right away you think this is not relevant, we don't even look at the pitch, right? But he comes in and we develop actually just first the understanding. The pitch is not that important, but it is important after all when you understand it. He talking also about the topics, and they are really like problems with networking. So when they do the networking right, they have more sales. So they want more sales, but the problem is networking. And then you have to go into this fine nuances when you pitch to the podcast host. You see the difference? It's not that easy. But I would say, answering your question, absolutely do it. For instance, I'm in podcast guesting the expert. For me, everything marketing, everything branding, everything sales, even I try to enter leadership a little bit, is relevant for me because I can make my expertise valuable for those audiences, different audiences. You have to change it a little bit. You have to a little bit know the pain points, and when you know that, right, then you can work on a better script. I mean, I hate that word, but a better presentation. But absolutely, I would say absolutely encourage it.
Fantastic. I want to talk about future trends in podcasting. I know that there are tools that match people to be podcast guests. Some of them work really well, some of them not so much. The pain point there for me as a host is that sometimes people take the time to actually listen to an episode, understand my audience, understand who I am, and make a great pitch. But about half of the pitches I get, maybe more at this point, will give one line on why they would be a great guest, or they want me to look at their profile. And I have about 200 people on my wait list. Some of these platforms, I don't have time. I'm not going to take the time to go through those. I'm also an indie podcaster. So my admin sticks to my podcast work itself, not to going through all of these requests. Then there are other systems like PitchDB where you can really craft AI-driven one-to-one, pitches. And the people who pitch me who act via email those are the best pitches I get, right? Because they've taken the time. Like yourself.
I know I read about you, and I know that you are deep into AI. Me too, actually, I like it. And I would always say, it has expanded my brain, definitely, my mind. I'm using it as a tool.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it differently. I think Perplexity.ai, ChatGPT, these are great tools. But, when I get something written and it looks like it's written by ChatGPT, obviously, it's already so clear when they just publish it afterwards. I mean, it's usable, but you have to know how to use it. Again, like anything, I like the Taoism, when we talk about philosophy. Taoism is like the empty pot of clay. What is the use of the empty pot of clay philosophically? Well, it is emptiness. You can use it for all kinds of things. You can use it for the good thing. Mm-hmm. You can use it for the bad thing, the emptiness, right? And so it's with all the technology in the world. AI, see the emptiness in it and use it properly, and you will get lots of benefits from it. So let's say you're using it for writing your pitch. I mean, you definitely should use it for getting inspired for your own position, which is the pitch. The pitch is a position. What is a position? Well, a positioning is as soon as, let's say, a good example, as soon as you say, well, I'm not doing average. And you have positioned yourself already. Like, I'm doing podcast interviews, bookings, but I'm not doing average. That's a position already. So that comes with a lot of other things which you have to be better at, and you have to explain why you're better and why you have a premium price. It doesn't have to be super exaggerated, but it has to be more because people will not believe you otherwise. But so you're positioning yourself to premium buyers.
Yeah.
And That is, all the marketing thing. I mean, you've studied it. I've studied it. And, marketing, like if you study, let's say, landing pages only, or, positioning only, you get all these great books about it. But everything takes a long time to get that education. Then you still do not have the wisdom to apply it. But now, because you have the knowledge, now you can use ChatGPT in a way that it gives you applicable wisdom for the moment, for this thing, for this landing page. I can ask, for instance, when I do the position, I can ask things like, what are the 10 best copywriters? Act as one. Well, I'm not going to use this, but I'm inspired by how it is written, right? So then this is your way, of course. You can also go into your own way of writing things from your website, and you say to ChatGPT familiarize yourself, but you know all this. But ultimately, I think for the pitch, it helps me the most when I can say, this is my positioning, this is my pitch. Please find me. It's a chat, right? So you have to give it some information, so it's a chat. And then find me 30 experts similar to me. Well, that helps me a lot because I explained it before. Because then I can choose one. I can even say why I'm similar to them. What makes me similar to them? Another interesting point, which I could use in the icebreaker.
Yeah.
I've listened to this episode, and I think I could expand on this topic or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's only helping you because you have this quotation mark on the name and listennotes.com.
Yeah.
There you find all the podcasts that person has been on. There will be some average ones, but you can find the good ones. And you have an icebreaker because that person was on, so you can talk about that episode where you listened in and listen to that podcast guest.
Beyond our use of generative AI, do you see any other trends as somebody who is a guest and somebody who's also helping book people on podcasts?
Well, as you said, the matching services, like all of the matching services where you put in your profile and the host put in their profile and their podcast original apartments gets, of course, algorithmically, also AI helped, aided, it gets matched. These are not bad services. It's like, everything has its time. If you're starting up, then this kind of podcast matching services are not bad because you can grow initially your podcast. You can also get initially the experience in podcast guesting. But ultimately, you want to really reach out personally. Like you use AI personally, but the matching services will most likely often produce a roll of dice situation where you don't know whether anybody's listening to. And I think it's very important to familiarize yourself with one website, which is called listennotes.com, like notes and listennotes.com, where you several indicators which are important, like the global rank. If a podcast is a number 1% global rank, it's among over 3.5 million podcasts in that niche, in that category. Number 1%. I mean, it's so big, it's so good. 0.5% and higher as possible. I did a lot of research with ChatGPT also, and with Perplexity, and with websites which have statistics and numbers, and it comes out like on average a number 1%, a number 2% has around 5,000 listeners.
No.
And if you go down to 10%, where it starts, the global rank is a few hundred listeners. And when you come to 5%, 1,000 listeners, you come with 0.5, 0.1%, which is real top level. Then you get over 10,000 listeners. And that's an average. That's not like an exact number.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I got to the top 0.5%.
Yes.
And then now I'm at 1.5%, but I have a lot more listeners, like 20,000 more listeners than I had when I was at the 0.5%. So I always wonder, all the different things, how the algorithm's working for that. But I think what you just shared is really interesting, gives us some food for thought. And I will advocate for Listen Notes because it is a group of, it's an unbiased company. There's nothing you can do to get higher in the ranks except for work on your podcast and bring in good guests, continue to grow, continue to be consistent. And honestly, for the first 4 years of podcasting, I didn't even know about Listen Notes until people told me about it because I was doing it for fun. I wasn't really invested in the platform. I knew that I was growing and getting great results and getting better and better guests, but I didn't know what Listen Notes would do and how to use it. And then once I learned, I was like, oh my gosh, now I have a whole new perspective. And once I started, then I started taking it more seriously as a business and as a true tool. I understand you have an ebook and a discovery call people can sign up for via the website.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll put that URL in the chat. Great. And it's guestexpertsonair.com/podcast promo for anybody who doesn't have access to the show notes right now. I really enjoy this conversation. It's not often, of course, that I have somebody on who does booking and can speak to it and has really walked us through the steps of how you help your clients, right? Mm-hmm. Get the best results and what kind of results they get. So, Josef, do you have one last thought? And do you have a favorite quote, mantra, motto, verse that you'd like to leave us with?
I like that quote from, most people don't know him anymore probably, but Peter Drucker. He was actually Austrian, but he was one of the main gurus in management. And he said, the purpose of a business is to create one customer. So that's the purpose of the business. I mean, one. That first one, right? Make that first dollar on the internet if you have an internet business. So he says, the purpose of a business is to create one customer. And he said, then marketing is not a cost. It's the only department that is not a cost department. Everything else is a cost because it's a cost and it's any other department, but marketing is an investment, he said. I like that quote because I worked for, I just like it. It's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one. And it's funny because marketing is usually the first thing to get cut, but it is.
That's correct. It's the
most important thing because it tells you your entire customer success journey.
Yes. Poor marketers, they get so appreciated. So they get not appreciated for the hard work they do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in, even though you're on holiday right now. I really appreciate
it's hot. You can see it in my face. It's already quite hot.
This has been such a fun conversation, and I look forward to further discussions with you outside of this interview. And I also want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. Don't forget to leave us a rating and review on your favorite platform because it really helps other people find us. And I will be back again with another expert to share some tips and tricks with you to make your business and your life a little bit better each day. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbandamplified.com.